Okay. It is my privilege and pleasure today on this lovely Valentine's afternoon to introduce essayist Randon Billings Noble to the English reading series. So, James E. Faust said that honesty is more than not lying, it's truth telling and truth speaking and truth loving. Randon's writing is remarkably honest and gives us as readers insight into her world while also giving insight into the truth of our own. Her essays orbit around themes of haunting nostalgia, darkness, and love. Randon has an MFA in creative writing from New York University and has taught creative writing courses in the DC area throughout the last 20 years. Randon's delightful additions to the literary world have been published in a myriad of literary publications, including her essay Ambush, which was published in the New York Times Modern Love column, and her essay The Heart as a Torn Muscle, which was listed as a notable essay in the Best American Essays in 2016. Her full-length collection, Be With Me Always, was released last year. We are grateful to have Randon here with us at Brigham Young University as she lives in Washington, D.C. and has taken away time from her friends and family to be with us today. Thank you.
Thank you all so much for coming. I'm going to start by reading parts of the first essay in my collection. It's called The Split. It began one day at the shore. It was late in the summer, right after a hurricane, when the waves were brutal, but we swam anyway, throwing our slight selves again and again at the bulk and force of the water. I can't remember what the weather was like, but I imagine it was a hot, clear, fierce day. I was 15 years old. I was with my best friend. We drifted farther and farther out until our toes gently left the sand, and the salt lifted us up and over each incoming swell. But then one wave rose higher than the rest and picked Jocelyn up, or was it me, and brought her crashing down on top of me, or was it her, and slammed us, a tangle of arms and legs, to the bottom, where the impact split us apart. I remember groping towards the surface, feeling the desperation tight in my lungs, and plowing my face deep into sand. I had lost my sense of direction. There, in the ocean's bed, hands clutching fistfuls of shells and weed, I had a long moment of deep clarity. Instead of being taken away, my breath was given back. My panic dissolved into a deep calm, and I hung in suspension with my body. But this moment was torn from me as a hand, her hand, reached blindly through the dark water, touched my ankle, and finding, pulled. She reeled me to the surface as a lifeguard reeled her. He had seen us caught in a riptide, had swum out to bring us back, had found her wrist just as she had found my ankle and pulled us both to shore. I remember coughing on the wet sand, the sun and sky piercingly bright, coughing and coughing, faintly realizing that I had lost that moment of clarity in the turbulence of recovery in my body's mechanics. As I looked over to Jocelyn, I thought I saw a flicker of recognition. We trudged to our towels, embarrassed, and lay in silence. It wasn't until the long drive home up the New Jersey Turnpike, in the safety of the car in the dark and the miles we had put behind us, that she said, "We could have died." I never asked her what she had felt under the waves, and never knew if she, too, had a moment of clarity on the threshold of death. I couldn't have described that moment to her, nearly impossible to put words to, and yet, at the same time, it was the truest thing I had ever, almost, known. What I caught that day was only a glimpse. It would be years before I had another chance to see. I was in France at a party with friends and friends of friends. We were on the patio of someone's country house playing a drinking game that involved reciting limericks and drawing on each other's faces with a burnt cork. When I went inside for a glass of water and to take a break from the smoke in my eyes and the French in my head, Mark kissed me behind the pantry door and asked me to go upstairs with him. I said no. But when Enzo, at 1 a.m, asked if I wanted to go for a ride on his motorcycle, I said yes. We flew, no helmets, my hair streaming, the wind blowing any words we might have had into the night behind us. Then I saw the tree ahead of us. And when I knew we couldn't hold the curve, when the impact was inevitable, I thought, with a directness that surprised me, You should be thinking something really important right now. But there was no time to think. We slid along a barbed wire fence, crashed into a tree, and I was thrown from the bike. Then nothing. I came to in a field of grass, its itchiness a reassurance that I was alive. There was, as yet, no need for last thoughts. Instead, I had to attend a more practical need. My arms and legs could move, my head could turn, but my face was wet and I couldn't see out of my left eye. But even while I was absorbed in this physical self, some other part of me stood by, aloof, watching and waiting for what I didn't know. I will get help, Enzo said, stumbling and backing away from me. He tore the motorcycle from the wires of the fence. I will bring help, he said again, before the engine caught and drowned my weak voice, saying over and over, like the lover I wasn't but wanted to be, wait, don't leave, wait. Then I was alone, or thought I was. It was dark and getting cold. That other self grew more vigilant after Enzo left. It watched as I flailed weakly against circumstance. It watched as I dug a mirror out of my back pocket and saw that the wetness on my face was blood. Blood had blinded my left eye, and I saw that I wasn't going to be all right after all. It watched as my shock became panic in the privacy of the night fields. But the whimpering, squealing me knew that second self, calm and clear, was there as well, attending me during these moments of separation. Later, I began to wonder if the body has a chemical, something like adrenaline that bathes us in this calm acceptance, something different from the endorphins that gauze over our feelings of pain, something instead that gives a mental awareness in the midst of the body's trauma. That day with Jocelyn underwater, my breath was failing fast. Very little time was left. And that night on the motorcycle, there was nothing I could do to prevent the crash, no use for fight or flight. In neither case did I feel pain, but I felt something far deeper, something the essayist Montaigne describes after his own terrible accident 5 centuries before my own. Montaigne says nothing of pain, but languishes over the pleasure of letting himself go. That sweet feeling that people have who let themselves side into sleep, he writes. He is so removed from his body, dead, he claims, for a full 2 hours, that these mysteries can be revealed. He describes the easy and quiet feeling he had while in the early stages of shock, but only hints at the idea of a split. Reading Montaigne a few years after my accident, I began to wonder if during such moments of bodily crisis, we split for spiritual reasons. More and more, I believe we do. Back in that nighttime field, I thought, now I am truly alone. And that's when the wave of hysteria I'd so carefully been riding broke over me. That's when I split. Half of me twisted my head from side to side and cried against my helplessness. But there was another part of me that felt distinctly separate, standing next to or above me, watching. I could feel her calm and faint disapproval. Not so much disapproval, but wisdom. You're only making it worse, my other self seemed to say. There's nothing you can do. There's no one here to hear you. Don't you feel silly carrying on like this all by yourself? And although I knew she was right, I couldn't stop until I had cried myself out. I became unmoored. My body slipped further away. Again, I felt the same calm, that same clarity I had felt underwater. It was indeed a sweet feeling, and I remember turning towards it. Did my second self reach down to collect me? Did the two of us become one again, but on a plane apart from the physical? The only bright light I saw were the twin beams of headlights. A car stopped for me. Its family piled out and held my hands, patted my cheek, and insisted that I stay conscious until the ambulance arrived. I'm going to skip the part in the hospital. The stitches, they hurt. And a little bit of my recovery, trying to play Wheel of Fortune in French while I was laid up there. So I'm going to skip to the end part. Even if the split self is triggered by a chemical reaction, it serves no larger physical evolutionary purpose. Adrenaline gives us the strength or speed or sureness to survive. Our genes have a better chance of being flung to the future. But the moment of clarity the split self gives us is a purely internal gift that doesn't affect anyone else but the self. And I begin to wonder if that isn't part of the plan as well. if we don't carry a small piece of mystery within us that is intentionally inaccessible for most of our physical, sandwich-eating, bus-riding, everyday lives. Being in this moment is like lazy Saturday morning spent in bed, awake yet not fully aware, entranced by the blank expanse of ceiling above, lingering in deep thought that vanishes as soon as I go vertical, leaving nothing but a feeling of great potential behind. This feeling lingers the same way the ghost of the split self does. It is something we can carry with us, regardless of what happens, when our split selves reunite, when we get up from whatever bed we have been lying in and walk back into life. Thank you. So this essay collection is very loosely themed around hauntedness. One of my writerly preoccupations seems to be the darker nostalgias we feel in life, the road not taken, that you wish you still could, even though you've decided away from that. So I'm going to read a short essay that's one of the hauntier essays. It's called Striking, and it refers to Wuthering Heights, and a quote where the title of this book comes from. Wuthering Heights is not exactly a love story, although we tend to paint it as such. But there is something of a triangle, and when one of the members of that love triangle dies, one of the remaining points says to her dead body, because he can't get over this, "Be with me always, take any form, drive me mad, only do not leave me in this abyss where I cannot find you." And when I read that quote, I thought, this character, Heathcliff, wants to be haunted, and I do too. And after I wrote this essay, I realized that this was going to be the title for the collection. So it's called Striking. It's told in 20 very short segments, but I'm not going to number them. But I structured it that way because there are 20 matches in a matchbook. Striking. A prickle, a glimmer, a shiver of feeling. A moment ago, you were alone with your thoughts. Things were clear, straightforward, but now you are haunted. Haunt. To materialize, appear in, frequent, visit, disturb, torment. None of these captures the contrary nature of hauntedness. To be filled with hollowness. To ache for something not entirely wanted. To have and have not. I read Wuthering Heights over the course of 2 gray days in January. Afterwards, I walked across a frozen field to the woods. The grass was stiff and pale, the color of lichen, and the woods were very quiet. I actually whispered, "Heathcliff?" No reply. But by Heathcliff, I meant, of course, someone else. I was away from my family. I'd steeped myself in Cathy and Heathcliff's story as if in a hot bath. But I stayed too long, until I became chilled, until the last line about the unquiet slumbers in that quiet earth released me in the still winter air, the silent woods. Was I trying to haunt myself? There, at the edge of the woods, the cold bled into my lungs, seeped through my soles, crept beneath my clothes. The book lay closed and far away. Whatever I was conjuring slumbered on. We can't control when the ghost materializes or what drives it away. Sometimes it's a presence, more often an absence. "Let me in," says the voice at the window. "I'm come home." But the voice at my window says wait, says no, says quiet is quiet. I strain to hear a wish for home. The tension between not being let in and not being let go fixes us, especially when it's the not being let in that won't let you go. You're held at the threshold. You're turned away, but you can't turn away. Cathy says, "I am Heathcliff. He is always, always in my mind, not as a pleasure, but as my own being." She says that her love for her husband is like the foliage in the woods. Time will change it, as winter changes the trees. But her love for Heathcliff resembles the eternal rocks beneath, a source of little visible delight, but necessary. Have my own past loves been merely leaves on the trees? Why am I standing in these cold woods, away from my eternal rock, whispering the name of someone else? When Heathcliff and Cathy are apart, the gunpowder lay as harmless as sand, because no fire came near to explode it. But after Heathcliff returns, the weather cools, the leaves fall, and the powder explodes. Then Heathcliff is left with only sand. Without Kathy, the fire won't catch. He is alone in a desert of his own making. And here I am, lighting matches, trying to see what they illuminate, tossing them away before they gutter out, uncertain whether they'll fall on powder or sand. Here I am at the edge of the woods, remembering all the diverging roads I took to stand here. Here I am haunted by my need to be haunted, by my reluctance to let anything stay buried, by my desire to bring hauntedness itself into this weak winter light and see it truly for what it is. At the end of Wuthering Heights, 3 graves lie at the edge of the moor. What am I at the edge of? Who will I lie beside, and who will lie between us? Or am I to be the one between? That night, I drive home in the dark. The road swells over hills, my headlights showing only what lies immediately ahead. Be with me always, I think, of the things that haunt me, the love of my young life, the places now lost, the mistakes I have made, and the mysteries I will never solve. Outside my moving car are shadowed yards and black fields, houses with dark windows or only one upstairs light on. Most of the living I pass are sleeping, and the dead, who can say? I'm driving home to those I hold dear, but I'm not there yet. Thank you. Okay. I'm going to read 2 more shorter essays. The next one is called Marked. It is ostensibly about stretch marks, but it's really about much more than that. Marked. When I can't sleep at night, my hand strays across my belly and fingers the stretch marks on my side. One is particularly deep. I poke my fingertip into its crater and wonder what I am touching, what layer of skin or tissue. I consider how it was slowly worn from the incremental growth of pregnancy. What relentless power to rend the body, even its skin. The body that once held 2 human beings now holds memory. The memory of the undeniably gorgeous body I had at 16, of the Indian summer that same but different body had at 36, lithe and stronger than it had ever been after many hours and 2 ranks of Aikido. The memory of the afternoon the twins were conceived and the morning they were born. Of my incredulity at the twins' size, beauty, and immediate, discreet personhood. Of the disbelief that I was finally delivered, not only of them, but also of the physical burden they had placed on me, over 15 pounds of baby, and perhaps another 15 of their accoutrements. The memory of their constant presence and my inability to ever leave them, even for a moment, not for a stiff drink, a pot of coffee, a winter evening walk, or a full night's sleep. The morning they were born, my body was freed, my soul ever more bound. Well, my body was almost freed. The loose skin and map of stretch marks will not go away unless I choose to cut them away, and I do not choose to remove these parts of myself because I believe this is what happens to bodies. They carry and stretch and age and scar. This is an important part of being a human being. I believe that changing my shape through surgery would somehow alter who I am, and I don't want to alter who I am. This is what I look like because this is how I've lived. I would sooner cut away my fast walk, my peculiar handwriting, my particular singing voice. Still, I mourn the body I have lost, but it is like mourning my time as a single woman when I married, or a childless woman when I became a mother. This kind of mourning is often misunderstood, but it is necessary. I loved my life when I was young and free, the many adventures I had and the mistakes I made, the romances and the irresponsibility and the knowledge that my future was wide open. But then I met my mate and traded possibilities for one rich certainty. When we decided to try for a child, we traded our joint possibilities for another certainty. We knew that our lives would never be the same. Our past lives are worth mourning, and mourning them in no way diminishes the life we live now. One person encompasses many lives. The origin of the word capacity comes from the Latin capere, to take or hold. After my body no longer held the twins, its excesses subsided. The fluids I had retained slowly drained away. My ankles reappeared. My belly tightened. I drank a lot of coffee and a little bourbon, took long walks, slept lying down instead of propped up, did cobra pose and yoga, zippered but couldn't quite button an old pair of jeans. Now at night, I lie in the dark and feel the marks that stipple my skin. These spots and blemishes, these symbols and signs, these imprints and impacts. They remind me that I have been stretched to capacity, beyond capacity, and then managed to stretch further and hold. The last essay I'm going to read is what's known as a hermit crab essay. So a hermit crab essay borrows the form of an extra literary source of writing, not a novel or a poem, but something less literary, like an instruction manual or a syllabus or a recipe. And in this case, I borrowed the form of a WebMD entry. My lovely introduction talked about being honest. And this is a very honest essay. It's about having a transgressive crush, a crush that I had when I shouldn't. And I wound up using this WebMD site to sort of find a way to cure myself of this crush. So in honor of Valentine's Day and love in all its many forms, here is The Heart as a Torn Muscle. Overview. Your heart was already full, but then you saw him, and your heartbeat code, not Morse, but a more insistent pulse. Oh yes, that's him, that one. Not the one, capital T, capital O, the one you already have and deeply love. But of all the people in that large room far from home, he was the one for you. And your heart stretched more than it should have, tore a little, and let him in. Symptoms. Swelling, bruising, or redness. The feeling that your lungs contain a higher percentage of oxygen and have somehow grown in their capacity to respire. A heightened sensitivity to glances, postures, gestures, attitudes, and casual remarks from observers. A propensity to blush. Pain at rest, general restlessness, an inability to sleep. Fever dreams, sleepwalking, conscious walking, out of your bedroom, out of doors, into the moonlight or an unmown field shrouded in mist, an ache, or fantasies of same. Pain when the specific muscle is used. When your heart beats to force blood through your femoral arteries, to your iliopsoas muscles, your sartorius muscles, your peroneus muscles, each expanding and contracting to force your legs to walk away. From him, from thrill, from all the promise and potential of an alternate future. Inability to use the muscle at all. Lethargy, apathy, malaise, especially after having walked away from the one in question. Self-care. Apply ice, cool it. The early application of heat can increase swelling and pain. Note, ice or heat should not be applied to bare skin. Always use a protective layer. Latex only as a very last resort. Clothing is better, or better still, several feet, a separate piece of furniture, a wall, or a building. Ideally, a state line, a continent. Try an anti-inflammatory such as herbal tea or a pro-con list. Cool showers and brisk walks and bracing air may help. Do not take depressants in the form of alcohol or otherwise. Avoid stimulants, caffeine, chocolate, Cheetos. Protect the strained muscle from further injury by refusing to jump into anything. Avoid the activities that cause the strain and other activities that are painful. Compression. Hold yourself together. Elevation. Rise above. When to seek care. If home remedies bring no relief in 24 hours, call your youngest and most bohemian friend. If you hear a popping sound signifying a break from your primary relationship, the one, capital T, capital O, you truly know and truly love, call your closest and most trusted friend. Exams and tests. Your youngest and most bohemian friend asks, are you going to run away together, tryst in motels, meet up in Paris, open a P.O. box, wear a trench coat, give each other code names, assume another identity? Want to use my place? Says, it's so romantic. Says, tell me everything. Your closest and most trusted friend asks, what do you mean, met someone? Have you thought this through? Is this choice supporting, adding to, enriching, complicating, marring, degrading, not even leaving a blip on the screen in the way in which you will see your life in the years to come? What will you be left with? Regret, memory, or absolutely nothing? Says, time wounds, all heals. Says, don't screw up. Recommended reading: Anna Karenina by Leo Tolstoy. The Bridges of Madison County by Robert James Waller. Time Will Darken It by William Maxwell. The Lone Pilgrim by Laurie Colwin. Mrs. Dalloway by Virginia Woolf. The End of the Affair by Graham Greene. No horoscopes. No tarot cards or tea leaves. If you must, you may steep yourself in stories of passion and price. Years from now, you can indulge in what ifs. But for now, right now, put your hand to your chest and feel what beats. The only muscle you can't live without needs to stay whole. Thank you. Oh, yes. I didn't know if we were doing that here or elsewhere. I'm very happy to take questions. Yes, in the back. Oh, that's okay. Bless you. That's fine. Start over. Yes, the question is, when writing about hauntedness, did I sort of decide to write about that and wrote essays in that direction, or did the essays come and then I saw the theme? And the answer is the latter. I didn't set out to write a book of haunty essays. It turns out that I naturally write haunty essays, and I'm preoccupied with these sort of darker nostalgias. And so after I had a mass of essays, I started shaping the collection, putting them in order, and then I wrote some new essays that weren't deliberately for the book, but turned out to be because I couldn't seem to get away from the hauntedness of the past. Thank you. Yes? That's a great question. How do I decide how to format an essay? How do I choose a more experimental form if I do, or if it's perhaps a more traditional form? It's a great question to ask. It's kind of a hard question to answer. The Heart is a Torn Muscle essay happened fairly organically and pretty close to the experiences that I was writing about. I was away on a writer's residency, which, if you don't know, is a lovely kind of institution where writers go and they give you a bedroom and a writing studio, and oftentimes they feed you, so the only thing you have to do is write. And I was there for maybe half an hour. I knew I wanted to write about this crush, maybe in the form of a timeline, like how does it peak, how does it break, whatever happens, like you can't sustain a crush indefinitely, so what's the timeline of a crush? And I was in my studio for about half an hour, and I decided to move this very heavy desk so that I could look out a window. And a little voice in my head was saying, this is a really bad idea, right as I was moving it, and I pulled something in my lower back. So I wound up doing research, not at all as a writer, but just as a wounded person. And I went on WebMD, How to Fix a Torn Muscle. And as I was reading the sections, symptoms, overview, exams and tests, self-care, I realized that a lot of that advice for the physical muscle was pretty good for this crush too, especially when I got to apply ice, cool it, like slow down, don't keep using the muscle, stop, wait. So in that sense, that one essay, it happened very organically. I thought it would be experimental, but it turned out that this knowledge that I was seeking as a human being was good for the work as well. Sometimes I'll start something more experimental, and then I revise it into a more traditional essay. One that I didn't read from, Ambush, that was mentioned in my introduction, started out as a weird segmented essay where I had lots of quotes from the Army Ranger's Handbook about ambushes and counter ambushes. The essay was about the love of my young life writing to ask me, so basically, have you gotten married yet? And I had, but I hadn't told him. So it sort of felt like his email was an ambush, and then I counter ambushed. So I had all these quotes, and I thought it was really clever. And I was patting myself on the back for writing about this difficult subject in such a sort of cute way. And then I thought, ew, this isn't right. It's too clever. So I took out all those quotes, and that experimental essay that was chopped up in all those little pieces fell together and became a much more traditional narrative essay that wound up being published in the Modern Love column of the New York Times, which was very exciting. So I don't have really a hard and fast way, but I like to play with both styles. If I'm writing something more straightforward, what would it look like if I pulled out some of the more explanatory passages? Could the reader still understand if I left gaps? What if it wants to be in shorter, sharper bursts? What if it wants to be in longer, more languid passages? And so sometimes I'll try different forms for a particular essay. And I wish I had the precise words to say when I know it's right. But I find that playing, risking, trying, failing often helps me find a particular form for a particular piece. Thanks. Any other questions? Yes?
So as an essayist, do you find that you're usually writing from personal experience? And if so, how do you make it universally applicable to your audience?
Another good question. As an essayist, do I find myself writing about personal experience often, and then how do I make it universal? I do, mostly because this is my view of the world, and I'm always looking to stories, whether they are classic novels like Wuthering Heights or stories of my own experience, things that I might have observed or overheard, the movie Dracula and the Elegy for Dracula essay. So I'm always looking to stories to try to figure something out. And I don't consciously try to make it universal, but I've discovered sort of a weird thing, and that is the more specific you make your writing to your own experience, the more other people seem to feel that it is universal. I'm not sure how the physics of that works. It doesn't seem that it would be that way. But I think part of it comes from being as honest as you can about sometimes the messier aspects of being a human being. Because no matter how hard we might try to live a certain way, things surprise us. We get ambushed by feelings or encounters or emotions or desires. And then how we handle that is up to us. But I feel like that messiness is common to humanity. And if you're honest about that, then it shows other people how to be honest with themselves and how they might proceed from there. Thank you. Yes?
Yeah, what situations do you find most conducive to creativity or receiving inspiration from writing?
What situations do I find most conducive to creativity and situations that inspire writing? I am two things. I like being out in the world, and I like looking and listening to people, sort of eavesdropping. Whether it's in a museum, if it's on the street, if it's in a restaurant, just walking across campus and hearing snippets of conversation. So I always have a little ear out for interesting interactions among other people. So I like to be out in the world paying attention. I don't have a smartphone. I think that helps because if I'm waiting for something, I get bored. And instead of turning to the entire universe in my hand, I have to sort of find something around to occupy myself. And the other thing that I find works is walking. This is ancient advice, but there's something about moving your body in that way, perhaps that rhythmic way. It also gets you out in the world. I haven't tried it on a treadmill. I don't think it would be that inspiring, but it moves you through the world, and so you're sensing things, weather, temperatures, encounters, that sort of thing. And there's something about that just loosens thinking for me. So it's very basic and fairly old-fashioned, but those are two things that help. Certainly also reading. Many of my essays invoke some kind of reading, whether it's a Virginia Woolf essay or a novel, Mrs. Dalloway, Michael Cunningham's The Hours, Wuthering Heights. And I don't do that deliberately, like, oh, this essay needs some gravitas. I'm going to find a classic novel to help support what I'm thinking about. It happens very naturally because that's just how I live. I read a lot, and so that finds its way into my work. And I use those stories also to try to figure something out. Thanks. Yes?
First of all, Virginia Woolf is perfect. And second of all, I got so angry when I heard your stretch mark piece because I was just angry yesterday about my stretch marks, but it didn't result in a beautiful piece. It just made me grunt a little and then go to bed. So I was wondering how I think with my own writing, I tend to think super broad. It's really hard for me to zoom in on moments and to know which ones are kind of worth staying with and writing about. And I was wondering how you do that, how you pinpoint a moment that's not just go to bed. How do you know which ones are something to write about?
Well, I didn't read the tiny scene from that essay where I discovered that I had these stretch marks, where I was still enormously pregnant, and I was at my parents' house over Christmas time, and their bathroom mirror is lower than the one in my house, so I got the view of the underside, like the southern hemisphere of my front. And I could not have written this essay in that day. It was more than a groan and go to bed. It was like, I thought I got away with it because I could only see the top part. I thought, woo. And it caught me. And that was Christmas time, and the twins weren't born until late February, so I still had a lot more to go. So part of the answer is time. Having some distance between whatever the event is so that you have some time to reflect on it before you try to make it into a piece of work, because the life and the work are two very different things. And I was probably trying to talk myself into this is okay. Because maybe earlier that day I had Googled, like, how much does a skin-only tummy tuck cost if I wanted to do this? And so, I didn't put that in there either. But it was probably in some ways saying, like, okay, how can I think about this in a way that's going to feel satisfying to me? How can I get over this and literally incorporate this new body into the body that I'm already living in? And so I thought about it, and I thought, well, do you really want to change this about you? Or is this a mark of how you've lived, the same way that this little gray streak coming in is and these little smile lines are? Would I want to change that because this is how I lived, and this is the truth? This is the truth of the body I inhabit. And so it took some time to kind of come up with that. But there really is one that feels really deep and weird, and it's almost like a fidget, when I'm having weird thoughts in the middle of the night. So that part is definitely true. So I think that time and trying to figure it out for yourself first, and using this kind of thinking as a conduit to that, and then trying to make it for other people, invite them into your thinking if they want to be let in. Thanks. Yes.
Just that question. You talk about time between the event and then when you decide, okay, this is something I want to write about. Do you do like a journal or something? Like, how do you hold these things in your head or on a piece of paper or something so that there's something that you can see again and come back to?
Yes. It's funny because I journal a lot and I never go back and read it. I almost never go back and read it. I've been journaling since I was 19, and I have like feet of this similar kind of notebook. And it's a little weird, but it's kind of like my safety net. A very few times I've gone through to try to recapture what was I thinking about during that terrible depression? What was I thinking about during that invigorating moment? And I think part of it is the stuff that really sticks out to you. It's hard to forget these turning points. It's hard to forget sort of the bigger cruxes and crossroads that we all pass through. But I think the more you write and the more you're thinking this way, you kind of train your brain to always be observant, to always be kind of catching at little things and filing them away. Not in a mercenary way, but it becomes natural. One exercise I love comes from Linda Berry's book Syllabus. She is a comic book writer, and she wrote a book that basically charted a making comics course that she taught. And one thing she had was called the Quick Diary. And you just draw an upside-down cross on a page. And in 5 minutes, you list what you did that day, what you saw that day, something you overheard, and then you draw a little picture from your day. And I found that when I do that, I know at the end of the day I have to write some stuff down. So I'm sort of thinking about that thing that's overheard. I'm thinking like, oh, that's weird. Like, I could draw that. And when I don't do that, sometimes when I do this with students at the beginning of the semester, I think, I haven't seen anything. I haven't done anything. I didn't hear anything today. How can this be? And I realize that I'm getting out of practice of being sort of generally observant. So some of it is a little bit of work, and then it grows into sort of a more natural process. Journaling helps too. I think even if you don't reread it, you still recorded it, and that makes the memory live differently in your own mind. Any other questions? Essayist questions, writing life in general questions? Yes.
A lot of your essays seem to like be pretty focused on like the body, as far as like your near death or like your stretch marks or like your heart. Is that something you've been interested in a long time?
That's such a great question because the answer is no, and yet I do it and I don't realize that I'm doing it. To be very frank, I've always felt a somewhat distanced relationship with my body. In an essay in here, I talk about my first year of college, and I felt like my body was just kind of a cup that carried my brain around. Like it took me to places so I could see things and think about things. But I've never been particularly athletic, and so I never felt like I had that kind of relationship. And yet, the weird thing is then you write a book of essays and people see things that you don't see in your own life and they ask questions like this, and I have to realize, yes, maybe I haven't been consciously thinking about my body all this time, but it's been thinking about me. And I do have, I think, a preoccupation with that I hadn't even realized. So that's one of the surprises of putting work out into the world, is that people then read it and they read you back to yourself. So no, it was not intentional, and yet it is absolutely there, and that's something I get to think more about. Yes?
What was your first published piece?
My first published piece was the essay On Looking. It's in this book. It was published by the Massachusetts Review, and I was over the moon. It felt like a very prestigious literary publication, and I couldn't believe it. I was so happy. And I told my husband, it's the tip of the wedge. It's the tip of the wedge. Like now it starts and it's going to continue. And then I didn't have another piece published for a year and a half. And I was crushed. And so he said very kindly, it's a really fat wedge. Like it was the tip of the wedge and it's just taking a long time for the rest of that to happen. And then I think The Split was published, and then the third essay that I got published was in the Modern Love column, which was very, very exciting, especially to be so early career. So my lesson in this is have patience. It could be a really fat wedge. You just have to wait a little bit longer. Mm-hmm. Yes. Mm-hmm. Yes. It absolutely makes sense. The question is, writing is so vulnerable. How do you decide what to write about? How do you decide what or how much you are willing to share with a wider audience? And it is. I think this goes back to me valuing the messiness of being a human being. And so for myself, I'm not afraid to go there into the mess and try to figure something out. The question then is, how much of your own mess do you want to share with the wider world? And there are messy things in my life that I will never share with you all, respectfully. And there are some things that I felt some qualms about. The Heart is a Torn Muscle, the essay that I just read. I had my husband read it before I sent it out. He said, by all means, send this. But that one felt pretty vulnerable. However, then my mother-in-law read it. And she's quite older. She's in her 90s now. And she read it on my website because a writer puts her publications on her website. And she didn't entirely understand how the commenting feature works, so she wrote me a whole long letter that I had to edit down because I didn't need all that in public. Like, thanks for coming for Thanksgiving. That was really great to see you and all that. Finally, she said, so I read The Heart is a Torn Muscle, and I felt totally sick to my stomach not knowing what was going to come next. And she said, it's beautifully written, and it describes feelings we have all felt. And I thought, okay. If my mother-in-law could say at some point in her life she had her head turned, whatever happened after that, but if she could say that, I thought this gives me some courage. If one of my intimate family members says, yes, me too, there must be a lot of other people who are feeling this. And so my hope is that in sharing some of these messier aspects of life, it might help someone not feel so alone with their own messiness. It might help them see a way through. It doesn't have to be my way through, but a way through. And just to recognize that we're all grappling with things like this, maybe not that particular challenge, but we're all grappling with things like this and trying to find our way through the best we can. And so I take heart in that. So as for the practical side, I'll write anything that I want to write about, but then there's a decision point. Do I want to publish this or not? And sometimes the answer is not now, and the answer might be not ever, but I'll put the piece aside in a drawer on a drive and wait. And it might never have a time where it becomes public. And that's okay, because whatever it is that I wrote, thought about, learned, figured out is now part of my process and will affect whatever the next thing is that I write. Thank you. Okay, is that it? Great. Thank you again so much for coming.